The Whittier Incident. The coastal fog rolled off Prince William Sound in long, quiet sheets, swallowing the road and muffling the tires of Claire Dalton's rental car. Whittier wasn't much to look at from a distance: one road, one tunnel, and a single colossal building that seemed to hold the whole town. Her uncle's building. She parked beside a slush-caked pickup and stared up at the concrete wall of Begich Towers. The place loomed gray and tired against the mountainside, a relic of Cold War practicality. Most people would have called it depressing. Claire thought it was fascinating. It rose like a great gray ship at the water's edge, its windows staring out across the Sound. Once a Cold War fortress, it held an entire town under one roof: shops, homes, a post office, even a small school. To step inside was to enter another world. Her uncle, Harold Bennett, had lived there since the early 1960s. The locals knew him as quiet, polite, and a bit of a loner, one of the few men still alive who remembered when the building's heavy doors had been guarded by military police. She'd come to settle his estate, which amounted to one small condo, a scattering of furniture, and a basement storage locker. The man had lived here since the early 1960s, working for a branch of government no one could quite name. He never married, never moved, and never stopped mailing her cryptic postcards written in shorthand and half-code. Inside, the elevator groaned its way upward. The hallways smelled faintly of diesel and fried onions. She found his door, turned the key, and stepped into a small, neat apartment that could have been frozen in 1975. The blinds were drawn, the air stale, but the desk against the far wall caught her eye: a reel-to-reel tape recorder, a stack of labeled reels, and her uncle's tidy handwriting: Channel 9, February 1962. Do not erase. She stood for a long moment before setting her suitcase down. Harold had been gone barely a month, yet the room still carried his presence: organized, efficient, and quietly secretive. Curiosity got the better of her. She threaded the do not erase tape through the machine and pressed play. At first there was only static and the low hum of the magnetic reel. Then, faintly, the staccato rhythm of Morse code began to tap through the speaker: urgent, deliberate, impossible to mistake. Claire reached for a pencil. She always used a pencil. Pens were unforgiving, and began transcribing. She had been solving ciphers since she was a girl, in math club and code club, and later as an adult contributor to the Cryptogram, the journal of the American Cryptogram Association. While some people relaxed with crossword puzzles or Sudoku, Claire preferred solving encrypted messages. Within minutes, she recognized what she was hearing: a distress call. Not from a weather station, but from a submarine. She turned to a bookmaker in the top journal and read about the message intercept, a possible sighting of a submarine along with its coordinates. She made herself a cup of instant coffee, that's all she could find, and read ledgers and logbooks long into the night. The next day, there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, a man stood in the hallway, late 70s, thin, wearing a navy ball cap faded to gray. "Ma'am," he said with a polite nod. "Name's Howard Green. I heard you were up here cleaning out Harold's place." Claire blinked. "You knew my uncle?" Howard nodded, eyes soft with memory. "He was a good man. One of the last radio monitors from the Cold War days. We worked the same posts for a while, Cold Bay, then here in Whittier. We both handled signal analysis back when the Cold War was heating up." She stepped aside and invited him in. Howard moved with the stiffness of old age, setting his cap on the table and glancing at the reel-to-reel deck. "So, Emily still works?" he asked, nodding toward the machine. Claire smiled at his apparent familiarity with the machine. "Yes, she does. I played several of the tapes last night, and transcribed the Morse code. His journals make for interesting reading as well." Howard turned toward her with interest. "You know Morse code?" She nodded. "Yes. Always have. I used to teach math. I started decoding ciphers as a hobby in school and college. Sometimes I even submitted puzzles to the Cryptogram magazine." For the first time, Howard smiled, not just politely, but with genuine warmth. "Well, I'll be. Not many people left who can read code by ear anymore." Harold would have liked that. His eyes narrowed. "You didn't erase anything, did you?" She shook her head no. He let out a breath. "Good. Some of those reels, well, Harold had copies of things that weren't supposed to leave Anchorage, but he never trusted the brass. Said if history was ever questioned, he wanted the truth to survive somewhere." Claire frowned slightly. "The truth about what?" Howard hesitated, staring out the window at the gray horizon. "You ever hear of the Project Red Ice intercepts?" She shook her head. "Didn't think so. Most folks haven't. We were listening for Russian spy trawlers pretending to be fishing boats. Thing is, one of them wasn't fishing, and it wasn't a trawler, either." Claire's pencil twirled absently between her fingers. "You're saying my uncle recorded, what exactly?" Howard's voice lowered. "I'm saying your uncle might have caught the only proof of something that never happened, actually happening." She looked at him steadily. "Sounds very cloak and dagger, Howard." It wouldn't happen to be about a Soviet submarine in the bay, would it? Howard smiled despite himself. And you've been here for what, maybe 24 hours? We could have used you back in the day. Claire laughed softly. It's not too hard to piece together from his ledgers and tapes. Howard gave her a little wink. I've got more tapes and ledgers to look through, she said. Or, you and I could have a cup of coffee. Howard stood up and left the apartment without a word. Claire wondered if she'd said something wrong or touched a nerve. But a few minutes later came another knock. When she opened the door, Howard stood there holding his drip coffee maker with its cord dangling down to the floor in one hand, and a container of coffee grounds in the other. I don't do instant, he said as he stepped back inside. A man with impeccable taste, Claire replied, closing the door behind him. I hope you have enough for two. Howard poured water into the pot and set it to brew. I figure you're about an hour away from discovering what's supposed to stay hidden along with those tapes, he said. So I'll tell you what happened, mostly because I've been dying to tell someone for years. He leaned back in the chair, eyes distant. Yes, it was a Soviet submarine. The sub ran aground near Esther Island, about 10 miles from here and 70 from Anchorage. It was a moonless night, and they'd been running on the surface to recharge their batteries when they hit a sandbar. They were stuck, the tide was going out, and a winter storm was coming in. They had no way off. Claire shook her head slowly. That sounds bad. What happened next? Your uncle picked up their distress messages, and we managed to locate their position. The top brass notified the Pentagon right away, but no further orders came for hours. We were in a conundrum. With the missile crisis going on in Cuba, if we captured the sub it could have pushed the Soviets into a full-scale war. That would have been bad for everyone. If we did nothing, the crew might freeze to death. That would be bad for them. And if we announced the sub had run aground practically in our own backyard, it made the military look incompetent. That would have been bad for us. He took a long sip of coffee. The Soviets didn't want to admit one of their subs had run aground and was helpless. And we didn't want to admit a foreign sub had managed to sneak so far into American territory without being detected. So, Washington probably made a few calls to the Kremlin, Howard went on, and an arrangement was worked out. Or so I believe. Luckily, we just happened to have an icebreaker not far from their position. It managed to pull them off the sandbar, and the sub limped back to international waters where several Soviet trawlers met it. A few days later, both sides began unwinding the Cuban Missile Standoff. Harold always believed that sub rescue, the one nobody could talk about, helped change the direction the crisis was taking. Claire sat in silence. The fog outside pressed against the window, thick and gray. Wow, she said finally. That was so long ago, Howard. Surely it's been declassified by now. And it's a feel-good story. You should write a book. Howard shook his head. Thanks, but I think I'll hang on to my meager pension if you don't mind. She smiled faintly. I won't tell anyone. Actually, I wouldn't want to get locked up, either. Tell you what, I'm just here to settle my uncle's estate, get the apartment ready to sell, and then head home. If you want, you can have all the ledgers and tapes, Emily too, if you want her. Or we can burn them together. Your choice. Howard smiled gently. Before you got here I thought long and hard about sneaking up here, picking the lock, and taking it all. But honestly, I don't know what I'd do with it, either. Maybe it's time to close out this incident in history. The one that never happened, and let sleeping dogs lie. That's a puzzle inside a puzzle, Claire said. What would you do? Burn the tapes and logs, or go public with the truth? If you like this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more.